In February 2000, 44-year-old Australian mother of four Katherine Knight snuck into the residence of her on and off partner John Price while he was asleep. Despite the fact that John Price had gone to the court and taken out a restraining order against Katherine for her frequent violent behavior, she woke John up and the couple had sex before John fell back asleep. The next morning, after John had failed to make it to his job, a concerned coworker went to John's house to wake him up thinking he had slept in, but after knocking on the front door and hearing no response, the coworker was alarmed by the sight of blood stains on the door and quickly called the police. Shortly after the police arrived and entered the house, what they found was a scene so gruesome and horrible that it shocked the country. Before I start this story, if you are a fan of mystery, murder and crime, then you have come to the right place, and I upload once or twice a week. This story is very gruesome and exceptionally graphic, as such viewer discretion is advised. In 1955, Katherine Knight had the misfortune of being born into a highly dysfunctional and abusive household. Not only was she badly mistreated by her alcoholic parents and cruel older siblings, she was also scorned by the people who lived in the town with her simply because they didn't like her family. Katherine lived in a very small town in New South Wales, where basically everybody knew each other's business. But despite the abuse, Katherine always tried to focus on the future. She would tell herself that as much as her life is miserable right now, in the future, she would have a family of her own and will take care of them the way she wishes her family had taken care of her. She gained employment as a cutter in a clothing factory. 12 months later, she left to start what she referred to as her dream job at the local abattoir. There, she was quickly promoted to boning and was given her own set of butcher's knives, and at home, the knives were hung over her bed. Katherine Knight first met coworker David Stamford Kellett in 1973 through her brother because they were close friends and worked in the same abattoir. Katherine married David in 1974 at her request, and on their wedding night, Katherine tried to strangle David, which she later explained it was because he fell asleep after only having intercourse 3 times. The marriage proved particularly violent, and, on one occasion when Katherine was heavily pregnant, she burned all of David's clothing and shoes before hitting him across the back of his head with a frying pan, simply because he had arrived home late from a darts competition after reaching the finals. In fear for his life, David fled before collapsing in a neighbor's house and was treated for a severely fractured skull. Police wanted to charge Katherine, but she changed her behavior to please David and talked him into dropping the charges. David left Katherine for another woman because he was unable to cope with the abuse, and when Katherine heard about it she couldn't take it, so she went out to the streets and threatened people with knife, and she was admitted at the hospital where she was diagnosed with postnatal depression and spent several weeks recovering. A few days later, Katherine slashed the face of a woman with one of her knives and demanded she drove her to Queensland to find David. The woman escaped after they stopped at a service station. However, by the time police arrived, Katherine had taken a young boy hostage and was threatening him with a knife. She was disarmed when police attacked her with brooms and was admitted to the psychiatric hospital again. While at the hospital, Katherine told the nurses she had intended to kill the mechanic at the service station because he had repaired David's car, which had allowed him to leave, and then killed both her husband and his mother when she arrived in Queensland. When police informed David about the incident, he left his girlfriend and moved back with his mother to support Katherine. They ended up back together and had another child, but the relationship didn't last long and they ended up separating. After the separation, Katherine met a 38-year-old minor, David Saunders, and after a few months of dating he moved in with her and her daughters, and still kept his old apartment. This made Katherine very jealous regarding what he did when she was not around and would often throw him out. In an argument she cut the throat of his 2-month-old puppy in front of David just to show him what she was capable of doing, and this is what would happen if he ever had an affair, before going on to knock him unconscious with a frying pan. And despite all this happened, they ended up having a daughter together, and shortly after the daughter was born there was an altercation that turned into a fight in which she hit David in the face with an iron before stabbing him in the abdomen with a pair of scissors, so he moved back to his old apartment, but when he returned to Katherine's house, he found that she had cut all his clothes. David took a long leave from work and went into hiding, and Katherine tried to find him, but Noon admitted to knowing his whereabouts. Several months later, David returned to see his daughter and found that Katherine had gone to the police and unjustly told them she was afraid of him. They issued her a violence order against him, so the relationship ended, and then Katherine gets into another relationship. His name is John Chillingworth, and they had a relationship for about 3 years, and there wasn't much abuse going on in this new relationship, and they ended up having a son together, and the relationship was really calm and good because most of the time Katherine was cheating on John with another man whose name was John Price. So John was 45 at the time and had 3 children, and this was the relationship that pushed her over the edge. When the relationship first started, it was going really well. They would go out socially, have some drinks with friends at the local pub. John had 2 children who lived with him. They were a little bit older though, so they weren't young, and the children reported to really like Katherine. They didn't have any issues with her. John worked in the local mines, and he made pretty good money, and he did really well for himself. But Katherine did suggest to John that they get married, but John actually declined. He was like, "No, this isn't a good idea, I don't really want to get married," and when he declined, that's when obviously things once again just didn't go so well. In retaliation, she videotaped items he had allegedly stolen from work and sent the tape to his boss. Although the items were out-of-date medical kits that he had scavenged from the company's rubbish tip, Price was fired from the job he had held for 17 years. That same day, he kicked her out and she returned to her own home, so they were apart for 3 months. A few months later, John restarted the relationship, although he now refused to allow her to move in with him. The fighting became even more frequent, and most of his friends would no longer have anything to do with him while they remained together because she became both verbally and physically abusive to him. So eventually, John ended up calling the police because he wanted Katherine out of the house. He wanted her gone, and she wouldn't leave, so he called the police thinking that they could pretty much escort Katherine out of the household, but the police came back saying that John needed a court order to get her removed from the house. In February 2000, there was a fight between Katherine and John, which ended with Katherine stabbing John in the chest. Finally fed up, he kicked her out of his house. On February 28, he stopped at the magistrate's court on his way to work and took out a restraining order in an attempt to keep her away from both himself and his children. That afternoon, John told his coworkers that if he did not come to work the next day, it would be because Katherine had murdered him. Despite their pleas that John should not return home, he stated that he was afraid Katherine would kill his children if he did not. So when John arrived home, he found out that Katherine sent the children away for a sleepover at a friend's house. He then spent the evening with his neighbors, before returning home and going to bed at 11 p.m. Earlier that day, Katherine had bought new black lingerie, and she later arrived at John's house while he was asleep, and she sat and watched TV for a few minutes before having a shower. She then woke John and they had sex, after which he fell asleep. At 6 a.m. the next day, a neighbor became concerned that John's car was still in the driveway, and when he did not arrive at work, his employer sent a worker to see what was wrong. Both the neighbor and the worker tried knocking on John's bedroom window to wake him, but they alerted police after noticing blood on the front door. Breaking down the back door, police found John's body, and Katherine unconscious from taking a large number of pills. She had stabbed John with a butcher's knife while he was sleeping. According to the blood evidence, he woke up and tried to turn the light on before attempting to escape, while Katherine chased him through the house. He managed to open the front door and get outside, but he either stumbled back inside or was dragged back into the hallway, where he finally died after bleeding out. Later, Katherine went and withdrew $1,000 from John's account at an ATM, and John's autopsy revealed that he had been stabbed at least 37 times, in both the front and back of his body, with many of the wounds extending into vital organs. So the police proceed inside, and they were walking towards this big curtains, and the other police officer thought it was a big blanket that was kind of covering the way they could automatically see when they walked in because there was blood everywhere. They walked towards this curtain. The police pushes the curtain aside, so they proceed into the room. So he uses his left arm to push it aside. The police looks down and realize that his arm is covered in blood. So he looks at this curtain that he just pushed aside. He realizes it's not a curtain, it's skin hanging from the door frame. So the officer keeps walking and sees that there's blood all over the walls, just splattered everywhere. Floor was covered in blood. Then the officers walk into the kitchen and they see plates of food being prepared. So several hours after John had died, Katherine skinned him and hung the skin on a meat hook on the door to the lounge room. She then decapitated John and cooked parts of his body, serving up the meat at the dinner table, along with notes beside each plate, each having the name of one of John's children on it. She was preparing to serve his body parts to his children. So when she was interviewed, she claimed she had no memory of the crime and she wasn't giving anything away, but she does eventually accept the fact that she killed John. She claimed that she killed him due to the long string of abuse that she was receiving from John throughout their relationship. They never got a clear story from her like what happened, but she does admit that she killed him. Katherine's brother said that she told him she was going to kill John and get away with it because she was going to act crazy, which is exactly what she proceeded to do. Katherine originally in court pled not guilty, and then midway through the court trial she ended up changing her plea to guilty, but she didn't give any reason and the judge knew exactly what she was trying to do. She was going to appeal the case, saying that she pled guilty because she was insane at the time. Psychiatrist actually ended up doing an evaluation on her and determined that she was definitely in her right mind and that she was not mentally unstable like she was saying, and she knew what she was doing, so the judge determined that she would get life in prison without the possibility of parole, and she's the first woman in Australia to get a life sentence with no chance of parole, and she's still alive today. I hope you all have a great day today, and this is all I have for this case. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe and leave a thumbs up down below, and thank for watching once again.